Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Dixon, and today we've got Jerry Arteaga on the podcast. He's currently the CEO of Valor Exterior Partners, which is a private equity-backed roofing company roll-up. And we talk about his background. He spent 23 years in the military, Green Beret, and retired in 2019. Spent some time on Capitol Hill as a lobbyist before transitioning over to the private equity world. We talk about his time spent at Cold War Capital before shifting over to being hired as the CEO of Valor Exterior Partners, which again is a private equity-backed roofing roll-up strategy. So we talk about his operational mindset from going from the military to private equity and now into the CEO role. Super fascinating conversation. So I think you'll get a lot out of this. So let's get Jerry on the pod. Interested in hearing conversations with private equity leaders, CEOs of private equity-backed companies, and startup entrepreneurs where they share their stories about their career journeys, starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, and the important role that having the right talent plays in building a successful business, then you are in the right place. Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. Here's your host, Justin Dixon. All right, Jerry, thanks for being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Justin.
Yeah, so let's jump right in here. Maybe give the audience a little bit of an overview of who you are, where you are, and what you're up to right now.
Yeah, sure. So Jerry Arteaga, I'm a veteran, so I was in the military, in the Army for 23 years. I spent about 17 of those years in 7 Special Forces Group, where I was a Green Beret. Then I spent my last 4 years on Capitol Hill serving in the role as a legislative liaison to the Senate Intelligence Committee. So think of it as, a pseudo lobbyist that, I was tasked with conveying the Army's message and its funding needs to the members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. So I retired about 4.5 years ago. Shortly after retiring, I joined a lower middle market private equity firm based out of Chicago called Cold War Capital. So Cold War Capital is a veteran founded, and about 75% of its 30 employees or so are all veterans, mostly from the special operations community. So Sergio Zepeda is the founder. He was a Navy SEAL for about 10 years. And then when he got out, he joined an investment bank, then went into a private equity firm before launching Cold War Capital in 2017, 2018. So at Cold War Capital, I was an operating partner assigned to a few different platforms. My first platform was a compounding and specialty pharmacy, where I was embedded with the executive team. The platform had already been around for roughly 2.5, 3 years. They were at 15 locations. I helped them grow to 21 across 9 states before moving on to assist in the launching of a landscaping platform. I served as an operating partner on that platform for about a year, and then did some other work with our dental platform and our pet wellness, so veterinary clinic platform. So I spent roughly 3.5, 4 years at Cold War before taking another opportunity with another private equity firm. So now I'm leading the roll-up of residential roofing companies in the Northeast. And the name of the company is called Valor Exterior Partners, where I'm the CEO. And we're backed by Osceola Capital out of Tampa. Not oddly enough, but interesting enough, Osceola Capital is also veteran founded.
Okay.
The founder's Ben Moe, and he was an Air Force veteran before going into business, where he was an owner operator that exited to private equity and then continued on with the private equity firm as their CFO before founding Osceola Capital. So right now, Valor Exterior Partners, we did our first acquisition at the end of July. Our second one followed shortly after in the end of August, and we'll complete our third acquisition at the end of October with a fourth and fifth in the hopper. So in 6 months, we should close 4 or 5 locations, and then hopefully double that next year. So I'm leading the efforts as far as the pre-acquisition diligence, post-acquisition integration, and then obviously growing the platform to be a more profitable asset as we look to exit in roughly 4 or 5 years.
Got it.
Currently, it's just me. We're about to bring a CFO on board, and we'll really ramp up our processes.
Got it. Well, I want to kind of start where you just ended in kind of this roll up and then maybe work ourselves a little bit backwards here. But I guess how I actually had Frank Bauman on from Cold Bore earlier in previous episodes from recording. And, we talked a lot about Cold Bore and all of that. And I met Matt at a conference in Vegas earlier this year. So I've actually gotten to know Cold Bore a little bit and their philosophy and methodology. I wasn't aware they had dental or veterinary platforms. I was always under the assumption they were going after home services businesses in the HVAC world. So that's interesting that they've got a few other kind of areas. But talk a little bit about kind of your transition from an operating partner at Cold Bore into another private equity firm, but now you're more or less, leading a company, and then walk through the roll up strategy, because it seems like you guys are in kind of hyper bolt on growth mode with 5 acquisitions coming in pretty rapid succession.
Yeah, so I mean, the transition from operating partner into CEO of a PE backed company, and I think it's important to distinguish PE backed versus a startup or an existing private company,
Mm-hmm.
because private equity looks at building companies differently than the traditional kind of greenfield approach.
Yep.
Private equity we want to focus on rapid growth, both inorganically through merger and acquisition, and organically through optimization, and integration. And so my role as an operating partner was more so of an advisor.
Mm-hmm.
So think of a McKinsey or a Bain consultant, except we are embedded into the platform, working on very specific value creating initiatives, mainly focused on operational levers. So one of the primary roles as an operating partner was pre-acquisition operational due diligence. So I'd work hand in hand with the CEO and COO to really evaluate and deep dive into the processes of the targets that we were looking at, regardless of what industry they were. So we have a checklist that we kind of run through and trying to learn all the nuances of these family-owned and operated businesses, because in most cases, they're very unsophisticated. So a lot of them are running a lifestyle business that was either passed down to them or maybe they started it, 20 years ago, and they're comfortable in their processes and procedures. And in their mind, what they're doing works. And to a certain degree, it does. It works for them.
Right.
But for us, private equity backed company, we are looking to kind of supercharge their ability to make, to bring revenue into the door. And how we do that is through, optimization of processes. And a lot of times it's establishing processes. Most of the time these companies don't really operate with a CRM or an ERP. They're on Excel spreadsheets and, QuickBooks online. And so, those tools, although they're great for a single business, you can't really scale too much with them. So as an operating partner, conducting operational due diligence prior to the acquisition is very important, because that helps me, one, establish if this is a good company. Are their processes scalable? What are the redundancies? What are the gaps? But two, and more importantly, it allows me to identify a lot of the value creation initiatives that I'm going to undertake in that first 100-day integration planning and execution process. So understanding where we can harvest that low-hanging fruit to create value, starting day one, is super important, because we want to show that kind of the hockey stick of us going up as far as profitability and optimization of processes. So as an operating partner, I go in, I identify all these initiatives and opportunities, and then I pitch them to the executive team. So to the CEO, CFO, COO, hey, here's the business case. Here's why we should do this. Mm-hmm. Or maybe here's why we should deviate from our normal integration plan. And ultimately, they're the decision makers. So I present the business case, upside, downside, and then they tell me yes or no, and then I continue on with execution, or I reshift my focus to a different initiative. switching into the CEO role of a PE-backed company, it's not too different, at least in this startup kind of phase. I'm still leading the pre-acquisition operational diligence. I'm still focused on the integration plans and executing them at this point until we grow our team out. The only big difference, or the biggest difference, is that I am the decision maker.
Right.
So I'm able to move a little faster, especially because I've had experience in the former part. So identifying the opportunities, planning for them, and executing them. Now I fully understand the process that the operating partner went through because I did it. And so for me, I just view the problem set through the same lens, and then you know the buck kind of stops here.
Got it. Interesting. And then going back to kind of your lobbyist days on Capitol Hill, I feel like that's an interesting, role. I guess maybe talk a little about that and how that has helped or given you any kind of like skill set going into Cold Bore and now into your CEO role.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So both in the operating partner role and the CEO role, it's more so in the CEO role though. Being able to effectively communicate complex ideas in a way that people who may not have the same, like, whether it's legislative or business acumen, uh, getting them to understand it and communicate the message effectively is something that I learned as a legislative liaison. So you take the concepts or the language from the Senate and then translate it down into military speak, and then vice versa,
Right.
right? So me as a CEO and to a certain degree as an operating partner, in sitting across the table from potential sellers and partners, the ability to effectively communicate what our plan is, our goal, and then kind of what the end state is. It really, helped me. That was one skill that directly translated over from what I did on the Hill into the role I'm in now, and then also as an operating partner.
Yeah, because obviously you need to especially in your roll up strategy, you're integrating, multiple businesses in a very rapid succession. So being able to effectively communicate the reason why this is happening and what's the benefit to everybody, on all sides of the fence, I think is probably a valuable aspect of your experience to have as you are integrating, businesses July, August, now October, and then a few more coming in the near future. How do you do that to, especially in the roofing space where you've got, frontline employees and even middle management that are, out on the roofs and doing things like that? Like, how do you kind of take the directive from the PE firm to grow this via acquisition and obviously grow the existing companies organically? Like, how do you kind of trickle that down to the folks that are, up on the roof and all of that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So first off, the change management process, especially when you're integrating kind of an unsophisticated business into a very sophisticated corporate environment, has to be done very methodically. Communication has to be early and often, and you can't effect too much change all at once.
Mm,
So because Cold War Capital is very operations focused, that's their differentiator. Um, and so we have Cold War had an operations playbook that I've built on and adapted to specifically to the roofing industry. And so my approach to integration is, three phases really. Um, People, and they focus on people, process, and technology. Right.
okay.
First thing I do when I get on the ground is capacity utilization. Who is in what seat? Is that the right person?
Mm,
What are the redundancies? What are the gaps? Who do I need to retrain? Who do I need to assign? And then I work with the management teams to kind of get that into play. Once we know that all the right people are in the right place, we start to focus on changing processes. And as we change processes, I rank order them on what is going to be the highest ROI and what can I build on. And so typically that's going to be the financial reporting system and the CRM, because
okay.
those are the two backbones of any integration. and everything else builds from there. And so I would say, if you've done one integration, you've done one integration because they're all different,
Yeah.
regardless if they're this in the same city, the same industry, they're all going to be different. And so, although we have I have a 100-day integration plan, it's just merely a guide because it's going to be tweaked based on the operational nuances of each company. And so you ask, how do we communicate this down to the guy on the roof? In my particular industry, the processes that I change don't really affect the guy on the roof.
Okay.
So as we work our way up, you have the guy on the roof swinging the hammer. He reports to the project manager. The project manager got the sale from the salesman, and then everyone reports up to the general manager, right?
Yep.
All of my integration processes revolve around the back office and how we sell and track the projects.
Got it.
So
Okay.
the guy on the roof, if I'm doing my job right, all he's going to see is a lot more work.
Right. He's busier, he's happier, he's getting paid, and that doesn't matter what the brand is on the side of the truck. It just matters that he is, up on the roof doing work, essentially.
Yeah. And so if I'm doing my job right, he's got a lot more work, and the back office has less work because that means that I've automated and optimized their systems to the point to where they're not working in the business, they're working on growing the business.
Yep.
So more sales, can automate sales, right? But I can automate the process that puts the lead into their hand.
Right.
And then, as we track the project through its course. So to answer your question in one sentence, I would say managing these changes needs to be done methodically and slowly.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, if you're to your point, like if to the guy on the roof, he doesn't necessarily care what roof he's on as long as he's employed and up on a roof, essentially. And so, I've talked to a lot of people at conferences and a few people on this podcast and in general about the private equity world getting into in abundance into the home services industry. Obviously, that's exactly what you guys are doing. How are you finding all these companies? You don't need to give me any secret sauce here, but I'm just kind of curious how you're finding them in rapid succession, and then are you, it seems like you probably are seeing the delta between what sellers are willing to, accept as an offer versus what a private equity firm is willing to offer, is that delta is shrinking from what it was, even a year or so ago, where people still wanted 2021 valuations and private equity obviously didn't want to pay 2021 valuations. So it's kind of a two-parter, but I'm just kind of curious, kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I for us at Valor, deal flow comes in a few different ways. Some of them are proprietary, so it's just cold outreach
Yep.
by our internal team. Obviously, utilizing a buy side broker to kind of really turbocharge that outreach, and then you have the network of your sellers. So they sold to us, they partnered with us. They see that we are doing exactly what we said we were going to do. And you got to remember, they've been in this industry 20, 30 years. Our second acquisition has been around for 80 years.
Wow.
And so they know other roofers. And so
Yep.
that's how we get a lot of proprietary deal opportunities. As far as valuations, I mean, right now, you're familiar with HVAC and plumbing and kind of the boom there.
Yeah.
I would say that the investment opportunities in that area are kind of dwindling because PE's been investing in that for 7-10 years now.
Okay.
The roofing space is very nascent in its aggregation. Less than 3% of residential roofers have been aggregated under a single firm. And there's over 100,000, depending on where you're getting your data from, there's about 100,000 roofers across the United States. And so with us being focused regionally, there's a lot of opportunity. Like I said before, we maybe I didn't tell you, but there's so much opportunity in roofing right now that I don't have enough capacity to take advantage of the opportunities that are presenting themselves. And
Okay.
I think that that may not be the case for everyone. So when you're talking to sellers, they're owner operators. A
Yep.
lot of them started with a truck, a trailer, and two buddies. And 20 years later, they got a $10 million revenue company, and they're doing well for themselves. PE firms, a lot of them don't have organic operations capabilities like Cold Bore or Osceola Capital. They don't have operating partners, but they hire operators to be the CEOs,
Okay.
right? So I'm an operating partner. Now I'm the CEO. So it's like kind of like a twofer, right?
Yep.
And so a lot of PE firms don't take that approach. And when they talk to a potential partner, it's all about the numbers. We're Osceola Capital. I work with Kurt Schwab. He's also a Navy veteran.
Mm.
He's the VP on the deal team for Osceola Capital that I'm working with to build out this platform. So he and I believe in meeting these partners in person early and sharing our story. Like, hey, this is our plan. I know that you're going to be approached by other private equity firms, but why don't you ask them these 5 questions? Like, how are they going to grow your business? What does a partnership with you look like? What kind of asset are you building to exit, and how is it going to affect you?
Yeah.
You know, it's got to be more than just the numbers. And for me, I'm a big legacy guy. Being in the military, the legacy that we leave at our units as we go on to the next is very important. And so the approach I take with an acquisition is I don't cut headcount. That's
Okay.
the easy button for most private equity firms to bring money down, to bring uh, to make a positive impact on the bottom line. I don't. I I retrain and reassign in any excess capacity. We grow uh, the top of the funnel to make sure that we can fill it. Hiring people is one of the most expensive and difficult things to do. So when you have good employees, you want to keep them. And sometimes that means carrying a little extra cost until you can grow into them. But that really resonates with sellers because I think that private equity, if you're not very familiar with it, like these sellers most of the time aren't. They believe we're going to come in, cut headcount, change their processes, put a whole bunch of fancy systems in place, and then limp along until we can exit. That is not what we do.
Got it.
So,
And
so I think that story with these sellers really resonates, and it usually makes us their preferred partner.
yeah, and I was going to ask about the talent piece because being in the recruiting world myself and having helped HVAC companies hire talent and skilled trades is one of the hardest positions to fill right now above anything else, just because there's less people going into the skilled trades than jobs that are available. Wages have gone up, and so people are they'll jump to the next guy's roofing business for an extra couple bucks and all of that. So how do you? I like the fact that you're not a headcount chopping private equity focus where it's like come in and just cut headcount and reduce expenses. But how do you talked about having the right talent in the right seats? How do you do that in a skilled trade type environment? And how do you then go out and as you scale find enough talent, or is that actually part of the kind of acqui-hire, acquiring more businesses so that you can get the talent just as much as you can get the customers and all of that?
Yeah. So again, this my comments will revolve around the roofing industry, so they're
Yeah.
very specific to this. But these companies have been operating. We're not a turnaround company, so we invest in good businesses,
Mm,
uh, and what makes up a business is the people that run it, right? So if it's a good business, it's going to have the majority good people. So for us, really, what our model is, all the installers are subcontracted crews. So
okay.
that kind of skilled labor is out there. Like there's crews that do that. Our in-house folks are the project managers and the sales folks. And then
Got
we'll
it.
have like an administrative manager and then obviously the general manager. So when we acquire these, so that's kind of another reason why we chose to execute a very regionally focused play, so that we can when you're spread out across the country, sure, there's more opportunities, but your opportunity to create synergies is a lot less.
Mm,
So in the Northeast, you can drive 3 or 4 hours, or you can drive 3 hours and be in 4 or 5 states, right?
right.
So that allows us the ability to leverage our sub crews across multiple platforms or multiple operating companies.
Yep.
So, for instance, our first two acquisitions were 30 minutes apart from each other. So immediately, almost day one after the close, we were able to leverage a synergy on a skill set that our second acquisition had that our first one didn't. And so we immediately, I introduced them, told them what the potential opportunity was, and they started working together. And so we're just going to replicate that all throughout the Northeast. And so as far as like skilled labor and how we retain them, so the skilled labor and the sub crews, we retain them because we take care of them. We keep them employed throughout the year. So typically in this industry, you're going to lose a sub crew if you can't keep them employed. So if
Right.
I'm keeping them working 2 or 3 days a week, and someone else has 5 days a week of work, they may like me more, but they still have to pay their bills.
Yep.
So the way we organize, that's all kind of the art of it. The way we schedule and organize our projects, we ensure that the crews are consistently working. So in this industry, you have a backlog, right? Well, I have access to a surplus of subcontracted crews, but the reason we keep a backlog is to ensure that we can have 2 or 3 of our best crews constantly working so that they
Yep.
stay with our company. Yeah.
Got it. So you're not buying a roofing company that has 50 roofers. You're really buying a kind of sales engine that has customers, and you're leveraging subcontracted roofing installers. If I heard what you said correctly, so
Yeah,
you don't employ roofers. You're employing and buying kind of the brands of these companies, and then the sales force and all of that.
exactly. And this is pretty much an industry standard.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
So the skilled labor that swings the hammer, that's all they want to do.
Right.
They don't want to worry about advertising, marketing, processing leads and payments. They just want to do the work and get paid at the end of the job. But we do employ in-house roofing and carpentry crew members that do the smaller jobs. So kind of the service and repair.
Yep.
And we were able to flex them to, if it's like a small garage that needs to be done quickly, we use those in-house crew, but the majority of our work is subcontracted. It's also a way to mitigate risk because
Yeah.
now the risk is on the subcontractor versus the contractor.
Right. And if you are slow and if you don't have the work, then you're not paying the wages of those subcontractors
Right.
and all that stuff. But got it.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. And then, you talked a little bit about kind of the due diligence process, both at Cold Bore and obviously where you are now. How do you obviously look at, these founder led mom and pop kind of businesses, or they started as Chuck in the truck and now they're, you've got a decent business. What ends up typically happening to the founders, post acquisition? Do they stay on and kind of just become a salesperson? Do they stay on as an advisor, or are you guys buying 100% of their equity and they are now retired essentially?
Yeah. So there's typically two archetypes of a seller, right? The first one, and the one we most commonly see, is a seller that is looking to retire, take some chips off the table, doesn't have a succession plan. So
Yep.
his kids either don't want the business or he doesn't want his kids in the business, and he wants to ensure that his people still have a job, right?
Yep.
So that's the first one, and the majority of ones we see. Second archetype is a middle-aged individual who loves what they're doing, knows that their company can do way more, but either doesn't have the know-how or the capital to make it happen. And so the way there's usually, I'll use roofing as the example. There are roofers who happen to own a business, and then there are
Mm-hmm.
businessmen who happen to own a roofing business,
Yep.
right? And so typically the second archetype is a roofer who happens to own a business. And so he just needs that help to go from that $5 million revenue mark to 10 and 15 in just a couple of years.
Yep.
And so the person who wants to retire, we typically ask them to stay on for a year.
Okay.
And it's all case by case. If they have a rock star, number two that has really been running the day to day, and they've largely been an absentee owner, then we can work with them. But we like to see a year, and then obviously we ask them to roll equity into the deal. So it
Okay.
keeps us kind of financially aligned. It keeps them interested, especially if they're staying on. But for the most part, most sellers stay on for at least a year, 2 or 3. Some have committed to staying until we transact again. It really all depends on what what their goals are. We would prefer the seller stay
Yeah.
because it's obviously been a successful business under their tutelage, and so if we can keep everything running the same, just make some tweaks to their systems, then it benefits everyone.
Yeah, and a lot of times the owner has the brand, even though the brand may not be, Justin Dixon Roofing. If they all know, the guy that owns the roofing company, it's beneficial for you to keep them on. So there is that smooth transition of power, so to speak. And you brought up something interesting that I've started to dig into a little bit, is this whole succession or lack of a succession plan in a lot of these mom and pop businesses that were started, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and they don't have a successor. Then maybe they don't have kids, or their kids don't want to do the business. And so it's interesting that you and a few other people that I've talked to have really brought up that a lot of the businesses that you're buying are in that same situation where they've built this business but they don't have anybody to take it over, whether they are a family or not. And so there's an opportunity for private equity to come in and kind of provide a legacy, even though that legacy is not a quote unquote succession, type model, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah. So private equity, I would say, I think the focus as of late, at least in the last 6 months, I've been hearing a lot about it with private equity getting into the services businesses, home services and other exterior services. I don't necessarily think it has anything to do with because it's a skilled trade or lack of succession planning. One of the primary characteristics of an industry that private equity looks at investing, at least at Cold War Capital and Osceola, is it highly fragmented.
mm,
So we look for industries that it's not aggregated. So that means
yep,
there's a lot of opportunity to acquire. If you go into an industry that the market share is controlled by 3 aggregators and they control 75% of the market, there's really not a lot of meat left on the bone for anyone else to go out and aggregate. Can it be done? Sure. Just depends on how many other people you're competing against, right? Because the last thing you want to do is compete for a limited resource and end up paying up for a
right.
business that then you can't really, there's no, you lose kind of that multiple arbitrage advantage, which is just one of the many value creators. But yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
No. It's just interesting that you talked about the succession thing, but I agree. From a private equity perspective, the fragmentation of a market is definitely a leading indicator of what ones they're going after and what ones they may avoid or skip over. When it comes to when you're going into an acquisition and as you're scaling, what type of position or person is your typical most important hire or most important person that you are trying to retain, post acquisition?
So at Cold War, Sergio's mentality around hires is, and I've taken it with me. I operate under the same principle. I hire for trait, train the skill.
Yeah.
Right? You got to hire somebody who has the drive to get the job done,
Mm-hmm.
execution focused. Right? Just because you don't know how to use QuickBooks or you don't know how to use specific CRM, or you don't know what an integration plan is, it's faster for me to teach you those things than for me to instill the mindset of execution and really just getting stuff done.
Yeah.
And so I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but Cold War Capital's operations group um, is all it's comprised of all former special operators with top tier MBAs. So we got Navy SEALs, naval fighter pilot, Green Beret, Army Ranger, all Kellogg, Booth, Duke. And so Sergio's thought process behind that in 2017 really was, look, special operators are execution focused, trained to mitigate risk, look at an operational problem and figure out the best solution for it, especially with limited to no guidance, limited resources, and just focusing on getting it done.
Yeah.
And then you pile on business school onto that, and you have, in my opinion, an outstanding operating partner. Because I think that, like consulting firms, they got really smart people. They help you identify the problem, they help you figure out the solution, they plan out the process to fix it, and then they drop it on your desk and leave.
Right.
Most of this stuff fails in the execution piece.
Yep.
And so at Cold Bore and now me at Valor, that's what we strive to ensure that we excel at, is the execution.
Yeah, which is why consultants are brought back multiple times, or you bring in multiple consultants to solve the same problem. And yeah, it's like, here's this really shiny, nice little toolkit booklet. Here you go. See you in a couple of years when you need to redo this.
Exactly.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, I want to kind of transition a little bit to the end here, but before we get into the last little bit, I'm curious, like, as if somebody's listening to this and maybe they're, ex-military, or they're getting ready to get out of the military, or they're trying to get into PE, like, what are some things that you think are most important now that you've been in 2 PE shops? I guess how do they get into that world? Because it is a difficult world to break into, regardless of kind of your background. So what are some things that people can do that are outside of the normal, just, getting an MBA or something like that, to try to navigate their way into, some type of role within PE?
Yeah. So I think, this is veteran specific.
Yeah.
You have, in the military, especially if you're a GWAT baby. So you were in the war. I was in from 1998 until 2020,
Okay.
and so folks from that generation typically have a hard time networking, talking about themselves. A couple pieces of advice. Number one, nobody cares about what you did in the Army. Nobody cares about what you did in the Air Force. Nobody cares how important you thought you were. Outside of thank you for your service, in the business world, all people care about is, what are you going to do? What have you done? And how can you help me become more profitable? I think one of the mistakes that veterans make is they come out thinking, I was an O6, I was an E9, I should come into a business and be VP of whatever.
Okay.
And it doesn't work that way, because the military is not a business. And so, because at least a lot of the folks that I've spoken to, because they have that mindset, they have a hard time selling themselves, networking, asking questions like, hey, I don't know about this. Can you, informational interview, right? You don't want to go to someone for the first time with the ask. So if you know that, I started my transition, about a year out. I was fortunate enough to have somebody I served with who was, his name's Greg Pavinsky. He was also at Cold War Capital. He retired about 3 years before me. And when I told him I was going to retire, he said, hey, if you're going to retire, like, you got to come work at Cold War.
Okay.
And so he's the one who exposed me to Cold War. He's the one who exposed me to Kellogg for business school. And so for me, it was my network really that got me into this industry. And we, as veterans, service members, in my opinion, do a poor job at networking outside of the military. And so to me, network outside the military, work on your personal branding. How do you translate your military experience into the job that you want in the business world? So like I every now and again I post on LinkedIn, but right now I just started a series where I'm using the 14 chapters of Sun Tzu's Art of War and making the correlation to how these principles of war can translate over into scaling a business.
Mm,
So this week I posted the first week in chapter one, and so a lot of the things that I talk to veterans about is don't talk about what you did in the Army. Talk about how that translates into the role that you want to take and what your differentiator is.
yeah.
Obviously, business school doesn't hurt. Uh,
Right. Yeah, I
but
mean, obviously that gives you kind of the best of both worlds. You've got your operational experience from the military and your work ethic and all of that, and then you couple that with, education from a big top tier B school. That's a recipe for success. Looking a little bit through a crystal ball, what do you think? We're recording this kind of mid late October. What do you think kind of the next 12 months are? If we jumped on a pod in 12 months, where do you think the general kind of roofing private equity world will be, and maybe where do you think Valor will be?
so I would say that the word is out for roofing, right? Luckily, there's 100,000 or so roofers
Right.
floating around. So there's a lot of opportunity for multiple players. I would say in a year from now, it's still going to be in its nascent stages of aggregation. I would say it takes roughly 3 to 4 years until you start to see, valuations going up, more competition. Um, as far as Valor, by the end of next year, I would say we should be at about 12 acquisitions.
Okay.
If everything's going well, 12. If everything's going well, close to 100 million in revenue, and halfway to where I want to be.
Okay.
And I got 4 years to do it in. At least that's my personal goal.
And that was going to be my follow up is, with Valor, you said you're going to, hold for 5 years at your kind of model. Where do you get to a point where you've hit your acquisition target from a volume perspective, and then it's all about more efficiently operating those kind of integrations where maybe you've acquired 20 companies and now it's like, okay, we've got our 20 and now it's like we're 2 years in, but now we need to take it for the next three more years to get us to that number that we're trying to hit.
Yeah, so I use 5 years as it's loose. That's a
Okay.
loose timeline, right? Like we're gonna do what the market dictates. So if we can build an asset that someone in the market is looking for and is willing to, make the deal that we're kind of looking to make,
Right.
then it could be sped up, or it could be longer. We could be, printing money
Yep.
and we just want to keep it a little longer. Maybe go to a recapitalization event or a continuation vehicle of some sort. But at a minute, we do have a minimum that we want to try to hit to kind of really hit that multiple arbitrage marker. And then it does become kind of a point of diminishing returns once
Mm.
you get to a certain size. So if you get too big, you limit the number of buyers that you have,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Because now if you're talking a 20 million EBITDA company that's going to trade for 12 to 15x, there's not a lot of buyers in that space, right?
Yep.
So there's an art to it, and it's all going to be based on market demand and the conditions. As far as who we'll sell to, should be a larger sponsor or possibly a strategic.
Yeah.
More likely a larger sponsor.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
You had a second
And
part
if
to that.
and the point to if it's just printing money, it's like, why not just hold it for a little bit and let it, fill the coffers and then go out for the next one.
Yeah,
But
so
no.
that's because this is all part of a larger fund, right? So
Yeah.
the Osceola Capital is on its third fund, and so the longer you hold an asset, you start to hit a point to where the IRR is less. The
Yeah.
MYC might go up, but the IRR is going to come down. So again, there's an art to it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes sense. Well, let's transition to the end here, Jerry. I've definitely taken up a lot of your time, and I definitely appreciate that. So I've got a 3-pack of questions that I ask every guest. Learn a little bit more about you, less about kind of your working world. But I guess what's your favorite kind of business book that you're into?
Ooh, um, you know, I would say I've probably read Good to Great uh, more than any other one, just because kind of the principles that he lays out with getting the right people on the bus. I'm a huge people person, right? Like
Mm,
the foundation of every business are the people that make it up, and the author's focus on that is really it's relevant. It was relevant when he wrote it, and it's relevant today.
yeah, it's one of those books that you could read today and then read 10 years from now, and the principles are going to be consistent. I feel like so. No, it's a
Because I went to Kellogg, I should have probably said Potter's Five Forces, uh, but
we can
I'm
edit
not.
that out. We can put this as the right one.
Yeah.
Just so that it's all good in case somebody from Kellogg hears it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then second question here: what's your favorite thing to do outside of work?
And this is a question that I get a lot, and I guess spending time with my family. I mean, I don't. I used to have a lot of hobbies. I used to fly. I used to skydive. I used to shoot quite a bit. But really, since I joined Cold War Capital, I just love my job.
Yeah,
Like it's outside of doing God's work in the Middle East. This job has been one of the most fulfilling things I've ever been able, had the privilege to do. So really my work is my hobby. I mean, that's probably not a healthy thing to say, but if I'm not working, then I'm spending time with my family.
yeah. Not a bad thing. If you enjoy what you do, then you're not really working, right? It's just you get up and you
Right.
get to do something you like, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, for
Yeah.
sure. So, last question here: favorite vacation spot, and you can answer it in 2 parts: winter and summer. I've had people be like, I ski or whatever, but or if you have one of your favorite that you go to or your family goes to, that's fine.
So I've had the opportunity to visit roughly 45, 50 countries,
Wow.
military and personal travel. I revert back to
You go to the
a
beach.
beach somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, Jerry, this has been a lot of fun. If people want to reach out and learn more about what you're doing, maybe if they're a veteran and they want to, pick your brain about how to make that transition, what is the best way to get at you?
Yeah. So I would say LinkedIn.
Okay.
So Jerry Arteaga is my, there's only one on there. I will say that in the 4 years that I've been doing what I'm doing, 5 years that I've been doing what I'm doing, I've never turned down a call from a
Okay.
call request from a veteran, because somebody took the time to talk to me. So I want to make sure that I give that
Pay it
back.
forward.
I actually sit on the board of a veteran nonprofit called Owners in Honor.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Owners in Honor is focused on helping veterans become entrepreneurs through acquisition. So
Mm,
basically, helping veterans buy businesses. It's run by Pat Flood, who's also a former 7 Special Forces Group veteran. He was a lieutenant colonel, and so he founded that early this year, and we're running the first cohort through. So if folks want to learn about entrepreneurship, if they're interested in becoming business owners,
yeah.
definitely look up Owners in Honor.
Awesome. Awesome, Jerry. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you being on the podcast and you sharing your story.
Hey, thank you for having me, Justin.
I hope you found at least one actionable insight from this episode of the Growth Capital Podcast, your one-stop shop for insights from private equity leaders, CEOs, and startup entrepreneurs on starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, as well as the role having the right talent plays in growing a successful business. It would be greatly appreciated if you would rate and review this podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and drop us a comment so we can expand the audience of this podcast. Thank you for all your support, and don't forget about upcoming episodes dropping every Tuesday.